Hello there my RPG lovers and welcome to another video. Well, it's been almost a full year since I started doing this series of videos.
What? How is that possible?
This is the 10th episode of Hidden Gems or Trash and we covered around 50 different titles so far, which is pretty crazy. Most of the games I covered in this series are suggested by you, so please feel free to recommend more games in the comments. And if you're new around here, this is the series of videos where I cover some obscure RPGs, action adventures, and sometimes the games that are at least vaguely related to those genres.
Just what I need.
Before we begin, I just want to give a huge shout out to my channel members, Patreons and Super Chatters. I'm currently trying really hard to bring all my channel supporters at least one extra episode a month, and that's just one of the perks that you get as a channel supporter. Anyway, welcome to another episode of Hidden Gems or Trash. Hope you enjoy. Number 5. The Waylanders. The Waylanders is a story-based RPG released in early access back in 2020. I covered this game before it came out and I was pretty excited for it. The trailers for the game were promising and the setting seemed very interesting and unique. They even had Mike Laidlaw as the creative consultant for the game. This guy was a creative director at BioWare for Dragon Age series, so seeing him as part of the team for Waylanders was a pretty good sign. Unfortunately, Gato Studio completely abandoned this game in a completely unoptimized and unfinished state. They probably weren't too happy with the reception and the sale numbers, so that forced them to abandon the game.
You don't have to do any of the talking.
But they should have posted an update about it, or at least something. Anyway, the setting is inspired by Celtic mythology, but there are two different eras in the game. You could time travel between Celtic and medieval eras, meet different characters, and so on. The technical issues were to be expected in the early access version of the game, and if they continue the development, those performance issues and game-breaking bugs would probably get fixed. However, I have a much bigger issue with the game itself.
We're also fabulous and stunningly attractive.
Like I said, this is a story-driven RPG with a bunch of cutscenes, dialogue and party banter. That sounds pretty cool if you're a fan of story-driven party-based RPGs, but this game has terrible writing and dialogue.
I mean it, he's a total dipshit.
I can't remember when I cringed more while listening to the characters talk in an RPG. And this happens pretty much in all dialogue situations.
With what army?
Me.
With what actual army? We need entire nations on our side.
Fair.
Whoever wrote this dialogue should take a serious look in the mirror.
Yes, well, he's an idiot.
The thing is, the voice acting is pretty good in general. They had some well-known voice actors for some characters in the game, but the material they had to work with is just terrible.
I've been looking forward to this day my entire life. The moment I finally meet the Tuatha De Danann.
This is a deal breaker for me because the story is the main focus of the game. I'm not even going to bother explaining why it's bad. I think these clips I'm showing you more than enough.
Well shit. Looks like the tiny druid guy pissed off my dad.
You play as a silent protagonist who always has very stupid questions to ask. The profanity feels very forced. All of these characters are cursing like crazy for absolutely no reason and it feels completely unnatural.
Good point.
What the fuck?
Don't get me wrong, I prefer when characters curse and use profanity in games because it usually makes them feel more realistic. But in order to do so, the writing needs to be done by people who actually had a real human conversation before.
I love a good fight more than anything else in the world, but we're fucked and we need to go.
I might sound too harsh, but the dialogue really pissed me off in this game.
He's a total dipshit.
So what about the gameplay? Well, it has some interesting ideas, and it works fine for 50% of the time. First of all, you get to make your character with some decent customization options. There are RPG mechanics like stats and attributes beside the cosmetic features for your character. Shortly after you begin the game, you get the full party of characters. But not until you get through an extremely boring introduction of the game.
That's the spirit.
I hate when games bombard you with unnecessary information about the lore, the characters, and everything about the game world straight from the beginning. Only a handful of storytelling RPGs can pull this off in the beginning, and the Waylanders is not one of them. If you ask me, the gameplay should always be the focus in the beginning, before you start introducing the in-depth lore and the background of each character. The game has to be amazing in order for me to care about this in the beginning. Just let me play the game, man. I don't know, maybe that's just me.
I've earned this. I'll flaunt them as I wish.
Unfortunately, the unfinished state of the game is quite noticeable in the gameplay as well. The AI will just bug out sometimes and start teleporting on the map. Although I didn't have any game-breaking bugs in my playthrough, which lasted only a couple of hours. Other people reported some serious game-breaking bugs on the Steam forums. Anyway, this is a party-based isometric RPG. You can have up to 5 characters in your party, and the game introduces more characters as you progress. Later on, you'll get a chance to choose which characters you want to bring with you. It's a pretty standard concept for a CRPG, and it works okay. The combat is not bad, and like I said, it has an interesting concept that was supposed to make it unique. The tactics and the formation of the game basically merge your characters together in order to perform special attacks. It's a cool concept, although I only used it when it was completely necessary. I guess it also depends on the difficulty you select. I started on hard, and it seems like this difficulty really makes you think about your actions in combat and how you approach it. But overall, the combat just feels basic, it's not that fun to be honest. The maps you're going to explore are pretty linear. The non-combat maps have some interesting things to see, and the art style is okay in general. Although I think the character models could look a lot better, but whatever.
And stunningly attractive.
Most of these characters are pretty ugly, to be honest. Some environments are pretty cool, but the maps where you get to fight people are not that interesting. That being said, this combat system would be just enough for me if the storytelling was better. The game focuses a lot more on the dialogue and the story, and the combat serves to fill in the gaps. Overall, I was extremely disappointed with this game when I first played it, and nothing changed in the meantime. The first time I played it I managed to get a lot further because I was hoping the game will improve. But this time around, I just couldn't take it anymore, so I quit after a couple of hours. Anyway, stay far away from this game.
Fair.
Number 4. Extinction. Extinction is an action-adventure game released in 2018 on PC, Xbox One and PlayStation 4. Iron Galaxy is the developer of this game, which are best known for Killer Instinct. The studio also co-developed a lot of famous titles like Skyrim, Uncharted, Spyro, and so on. Extinction seems inspired by Attack on Titan anime because the main focus of the gameplay is to slay these huge monsters. They are called Raveni, and they will destroy the village if you don't kill them in time. It's basically that simple, and it could have been an amazing game. Unfortunately, the game has really annoying features and extremely repetitive gameplay loop. The story is almost non-existing. You play as a character named Avil, and if I hear that name again after I'm done with this video, I'm probably going to go insane.
Avil, you should rescue the civilians if you can. Nice job, Avil. Keep up the good work. Avil, valid rune strike targets will glow when you aim at them. Avil, your rune energy is fully charged. Avil.
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
This is one of those games that has a narrator who just doesn't want to shut up, no matter what you do or don't do.
That was just nasty.
I swear man, it gave me some serious PTSD, because it's almost exactly the same like Sacred Tree. Yeah, remember that?
Out of the lava, into the traps. Whoa! Who's raining bombs on our parade? There, that elite! Go on, use those explodey guys on the flagship. Oh, I suppose I don't need to whisper. Only you can hear me.
Avil.
There is no option to turn it off, so good luck. No, but seriously, she keeps repeating shit, and long after you start the game, she gives you some stupid tutorial hints. It's ridiculously bad. Besides that, you will have actual dialogue with her, but it's totally stupid and nobody cares. I'm convinced that people who make these kinds of design decisions never played a game in their life.
He's a total dipshit.
Anyway, this game is all about action, so if that's good, who cares about the narrator, right? Well, yeah, but the gameplay is pretty stupid as well. First of all, you move extremely fast in this game, which would be totally fine if the controls are good. The controls are not terrible, but they are definitely janky as hell. This is especially noticeable when you try to use the environments. Extinction allows you to swing off buildings and trees in order to build momentum, and that's pretty cool, but ultimately it's almost completely useless. The main objective is usually to kill the Raveni as soon as possible, but there are other objectives on each level. Saving innocent people is one of those objectives, which is featured on pretty much all levels. They just stand around the shrines like idiots and cheer for you until you save them. Or they just die, but this doesn't mean anything. Unless for some reason you actually care about these side objectives. The only reason to even consider doing them is the extra points you get that you can use for getting new skills. Speaking of which, the skills you can unlock are equally useless and downright stupid. Check this out, how about a skill that increases the speed when you rescue civilians? Or, get this, 10% higher tree jump. Yeah, really fucking creative.
Avil.
You can also get new combo moves in combat, and this might sound shocking, but this is also useless as well. The actual combat is only useful against regular, shitty enemies that can be defeated by button mashing and occasionally dodging. So what about those giants? They look pretty cool to fight, right? Well yeah, in a way, the only redeeming factor of this game is how it feels to bring down these behemoths. But, as you probably expected, even this feature has a lot of issues. You don't get to fight Raveni monsters as regular creatures in the game, because it won't work. To put it simply, your main objective is to cut off their heads. You can also cut off their feet and arms, so you stop them from killing you. Even the very first Raveni you fight can one-shot you, which kinda makes sense, right? But you just respawn right away and continue where you left. Ravenis can grow their limbs back, so you usually have to repeat the whole process. Where it gets a bit more complex is when Raveni gets their armor. So before you can cut off their limbs or the head, you need to break the various armor parts. It works okay, but this is all you get, literally. You just go there, aim for the part you wish to break, eventually get to the head and repeat the same process. There is no actual fighting, which is really weird. The regular attacks and combos can only be used in fights with smaller enemies, but like I said before, it doesn't matter. The attack you use to break or cut off limbs will slow down the time, which allows you to precisely aim on the targets. It's really easy to do this, so I don't see the point of this gameplay loop. It's a very cool concept, which could have been amazing actually. I don't even have to tell you why this gameplay is very repetitive and mindless, right? Stronger Ravenis will just have more armor that you need to break and that's it. No depth at all, zero progression and extremely repetitive. There is a bar which shows you the percentage of town that's been destroyed, and if that reaches 0, the game's over. That will rarely happen if you just go straight for the Raveni fight, because like I said, side objectives are a complete joke. It's a shame because it could have been a decent game. Unfortunately, it's not, so stay far away from this game.
Raveni forces are destroying the city. Avil, you must stop them.
Avil, what are you doing? The Raveni are destroying my kingdom.
Number 3. Immortal Unchained. Immortal Unchained is a Souls-like action RPG released in 2018 for PC, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. It seems like the ports on consoles were in a pretty rough shape, and I'm pretty sure they're not even available anymore on the online store. Although I did some research, and it seems like it performs a lot better on PS5, so there's that I guess. My performance was okay on PC, and I did have some notable frame drops in some areas while running the game on 2K resolution with a combination of high and medium settings. This was one of the first, if not the first Souls-like that focused on guns instead of melee weapons. The idea for the gameplay was pretty much the same like in all Souls-like games, but using guns were supposed to add a new dynamic to this subgenre of RPGs, and it did. The latest game that could be described in a similar manner is Remnant 2. And judging by how that game has been received, it's obvious that there is a strong audience of players who will gladly play these kinds of games. Immortal Unchained is definitely not as good as Remnant 2, but that doesn't mean the game is bad. I actually think it's pretty underrated, despite the problems I had with it. To go back to the beginning, you play as a nameless prisoner who gets unchained. Surprise, surprise. You're apparently a special kind of a warrior who's supposed to affect the fate of the 9 worlds. Yeah, it's not very original, but the cutscenes are pretty cool and they kept my attention. There are a handful of NPCs you're going to meet in the game who don't want to rip your head off. Everyone else is undead creatures that you have to shoot in the face. The character creation menu is actually pretty cool. You get some interesting options to customize your character, which is slightly more important in this game than in similar RPGs. That's because there is no armor pieces in the game, only weapons, consumables and some trinket-like items that will boost your stats a little bit. So the whole focus of building your character is around weapons and increasing different stats. I thought the stats are going to be your run-of-the-mill RPG stuff, but they are slightly different as well. I found the beginning of the game really fun and unusual in a way. Mostly because you get to shoot things instead of charging them with melee weapons. The ballistics of weapons is not amazing, but I think it's good enough for this kind of a gameplay to work. I think the main reason why people didn't like this gameplay so much is the lack of impact with guns. That's not to say that the sense of impact is non-existing, but it's nowhere near the level of even the first Remnant game. It does feel a bit floatier than it should be, but then again, I got used to crappy range mechanics from other RPGs, so it's not bothering me. What is bothering me though is the jittering character animation that's very jarring to look at. Just moving around with your character seems very awkward, especially if you watch your character model. It doesn't affect the responsiveness of the controls that much, but it's just very awkward to look at. Speaking of controls, they are definitely a bit floatier with the controller. It's better with mouse and keyboard, but I use the PS5 controller on PC. The aiming seems to have some sort of smoothing, which doesn't feel that good. There's also aim assist if you want it, as well as classic lock-on, which is not extremely useful in this game. You would think it's like a cheat code, because you won't be able to miss shots. However, most enemies have specific weak spots, and it's much more effective to try and hit those spots instead of just firing with a lock-on. This kinda becomes a problem the more you play, because these weak spots are on enemies' back in like 90% of situations, except in some particular boss fights. So it's literally the same tactic over and over again. You want to get behind the enemy or snipe them from afar. Some of these fights are not designed very well and you can cheese them easily, like in this case. Speaking of which, I focused on sniper rifles and shotguns, which is a pretty good combination. All weapons have a special strong attack, which uses your mana, and regular shots, which require ammo. Those special abilities can usually one-shot a regular enemy, especially if you aim for the weak spots. But even the bosses take huge amounts of damage if you hit the weak spots. A bit too much if you ask me, because some of them are really easy to kill. You have to worry about the ammo though, although I didn't find that too tedious, because you're going to loot some ammo pouches here and there. And you always restock at the shrines, which are like bonfires in Souls games. You won't be able to switch weapons until you visit one of these shrines, which is a weird design decision. There is a certain amount of depth even with the most basic enemies, which I really like. For example, you can shoot their arms and they will drop their weapons. Or if you shoot their legs, they will fall down, and the dismemberment system is pretty cool. The weapons can be upgraded with the materials that you gather, and you'll find a bunch of different weapons with unique elemental effects. The itemization is pretty solid, if we exclude the non-existing armor pieces, although most of the weapons look pretty much the same. Then we came to the melee combat, which does exist in this game. It's pretty basic though, and pretty flawed. It doesn't feel that bad when you use melee weapons, but the hitboxes are simply terrible sometimes. This is the biggest problem in boss fights. The iframes on your dodge are more than generous, which kinda offsets this problem a little bit. But still, a lot of melee attacks are not telegraphed properly, and you'll wonder how you get hit more than often. It can be very annoying because bosses have a lot of melee attacks. This has to be my biggest issue I have with the game, along with reusing boss fights like the majority of lower budget Souls-likes. The level design is solid and it gets better as you progress. For some reason, I thought the whole game is going to have these super generic sci-fi alien looking structures. Luckily, that was not the case, although I think the level design is not amazing. There are a bunch of shortcuts that you can unlock, as you would expect in a Souls-like game, and they work okay. You get a hub area as well, where you can choose different levels to unlock, with the main currency you obtain while killing things. Overall, I like this game, despite all of its issues. I still have to finish it, but I got pretty far, I think. If you really don't like what you see, you should skip it. But if you like what I had to say about it and you think the gameplay looks fine, I recommend trying it out. Number 2. Bionic Commando. Bionic Commando is an old Capcom franchise from 1987. There are 7 games in this franchise, but we're going to talk about the one that got released in 2009. This is the only 3D action-adventure game in the franchise, which I had a chance to play back in the day. I didn't remember much except the bionic arm that you use for pretty much everything in the game. I was really eager to start playing this game again because I remember I had a lot of fun with it. And I'm glad to say that it wasn't just nostalgia, this game is still pretty damn fun in general. It's not without its issues, and we're going to talk about that as well. First of all, I accidentally started the game on the hardest difficulty. I was just going to try out the game a little bit on the medium difficulty, and for some reason I thought Commando is the right option. It turns out that this is the hardest difficulty that you can select, and you can't change it during your playthrough. The hardest difficulty doesn't make the game extremely hard, and you don't need to be a god gamer to complete the game. However, when you ramp up the difficulty, the problems with some mechanics get magnified, which can definitely cause some frustrations. But first, let's find out what's the game all about. This game continues the story from the original Bionic Commando, and once again you play as Major Nathan Spencer. He was imprisoned after the happenings of the first game, even though he was innocent. Ascension City has been attacked with a devastating experimental weapon, and it seems like Spencer is the only one who can stop the people behind the attack. Shortly after the beginning, he is reconnected with his bionic arm, which gives him amazing abilities. There are a couple of cutscenes in the game which push the story forward, and to be honest, I didn't expect too much. However, the story remains interesting throughout the whole game, and the plot twist is pretty good.
This isn't over.
You're not going to play this game because of the story though. When it comes to the visuals, the game aged okay, and it doesn't look that bad if you can run it in high resolutions. I played it on 4K with no technical issues, it works out of the box on my PC. Although it's pretty clear that this is a very lazy port on PC, since it lacks any meaningful graphical options. The UI won't scale properly on 4K, but that's the only notable problem that I had. Some environments in the game have very low resolution textures, and the distant terrain looks pretty outdated. That's fine by me, but I had a bigger problem with some generic looking levels, especially in the beginning. However, the game picks up with the visual variety as you progress through the levels.
So all troops in the park area?
The gameplay is still really fun in Bionic Commando. You start off with a simple pistol that doesn't do that much damage. Throughout the game you'll find a couple of more weapon types which are effective against specific enemies. But the gunplay in general is not very good in this game. It lacks impact on hits and it can feel pretty floaty. The heavier guns that you can use sometimes are okay, but this game won't blow you away with shooting mechanics. It's average at best, but it's more than enough because that's not the main focus of the gameplay. The most frustrating problems with the gunplay comes from the enemies you're going to fight. They are annoyingly accurate with their guns and sometimes it just doesn't make a lot of sense. This is obviously a bigger issue on the hardest difficulty because you can only take a handful of bullets before you die. And you can't see your health bar, which is pretty stupid, especially considering that you can see the health bar on enemies. Enemies can hit you with no issues from a very long distance, and even when you're in the air at very high speeds. Some boss fights are also really frustrating because they don't play fair. For example, you can clearly see that the machine gun fire is missing you, but you still get hit. Whatever you do, just don't play this game on the hardest difficulty because it's not worth it. The bionic arm gives you various mechanics that you gradually unlock as you progress through the levels, and this is the main focus of the gameplay. The most basic but very impressive function of the arm is the grappling hook, which allows you to traverse every level like Spider-Man basically. A much clunkier version of Spider-Man, but hey, you have a giant metal arm attached to you, so it kinda makes sense. That shouldn't justify the stiff controls though. This game doesn't have the smoothest control scheme, which makes the gameplay with the hook stiffer than it should be. There is definitely a learning curve, but once you get used to it, it's not a huge issue. Although you shouldn't listen to me when it comes to this, because I played a bunch of games with stiff control schemes with no issues. This game has an impressive physics engine. The grappling hook can bend a couple of times on various objects, and it looks and feels pretty natural and realistic. You can pull yourself with the hook, swing, grab objects and throw them at enemies, attack weak spots on enemies, and so on. Pretty much all of these bionic arm features are useful at some points. The interactable objects are highlighted, which makes it really easy to know what can be used with the arm. Throwing objects at enemies is pretty much necessary because trying to kill them with your weapons is not that effective. Not to mention that ammo is pretty limited, which is another way the game tells you to focus on your arm abilities. That being said, I think the game suffers a bit from the lack of unique enemy types. You have regular guys with the guns, and later some stronger guys with machine guns, snipers, and a couple of bigger robots. The game reuses these enemy types a lot, on pretty much every level. That being said, I would still heavily recommend this game. It doesn't overstay its welcome, you can beat it in about 5 to 6 hours, and even more if you want to get all the collectibles. I also have to give it some props because it doesn't have any quick time events like many other similar games from this time period. Overall, I had a lot of fun with this game. Number 1. Champions of Norrath. Champions of Norrath Realms of EverQuest is an isometric action RPG released exclusively on PlayStation 2 in 2004, which means that nowadays you can only play it through emulation on PC or if you have the original hardware.
Do you know why you have come?
Enough!
To be honest with you, I didn't expect much from this game, but it ended up being one of the most fun ARPGs I played in a while, despite the technical issues I had. Yeah, I had a lot of slowdowns that make the gameplay sluggish, no matter which emulation settings I tweaked. These frame drops and slowdowns happen when certain fire effects are on the screen. I found the quote-unquote best emulation settings for the game, but that didn't fix the issue. I really wish to see a remaster of this game on PC and all current-gen consoles. That would be freaking amazing, although the chances for that are pretty slim. This game is set in the legendary universe of EverQuest, which was the first commercially successful MMORPG on the market. Champions of Norrath has a simple fantasy premise and a very straightforward story. It's a classic fantasy story where you play as a hero that needs to save the world, basically. You need to help the elves in their war with the orcs, that's pretty much all you need to know. The story is pretty linear, but on the other side, the presentation, the writing, and even the voice acting is pretty decent. Especially for a game that came out in 2004 on PlayStation 2.
Believe what you will, but I have no wish to sink my fangs into any mortal creature like some bloated parasite.
I like how all the bad guys have these evil monologues before the fight. It makes them a bit more memorable. The story is like whatever in this game. Visually, the game still looks pretty decent and pleasant for the eyes. The art style carries the game, and you will visit a lot of unique looking areas throughout 5 acts. The visual variety is really impressive. You start off by exploring the forest area, lava level, vampire castle, the beach, snowy fields, and so on. Not to mention all the unique looking dungeons in the game. Same goes for different enemy types in all of these levels. Modern RPGs could learn a lot from this game when it comes to this. But the main reason why I want to play this game is action and possibly co-op. I don't have a clue if you can actually set up the co-op play with the emulator, but I assume you can. I played through the game in the single player mode with the Shadow Knight class. You can choose between 5 different classes before you start the game, each with their own unique playstyles. The hack and slash action is pretty basic, but the game manages to make it really fun. You get a simple attack button that you're going to spam like crazy, unique class skills that you unlock as you level up, and a very decent itemization system. Compared to modern ARPGs, Champions of Norrath is extremely basic, but that doesn't make it bad. First of all, the game is not messing around. You absolutely need to take the advantage of every single mechanic and feature in the game. Otherwise, it can be really easy to die in fights, especially in later levels. Besides the simple attack button, the game features a block mechanic. The block is an essential mechanic for melee characters. Pretty much everything that enemy can throw at you can be blocked. It's especially important in some boss fights, which can deal massive damage to you if you just stand there and button mash. Speaking of which, even though these boss fights are not that crazy, I really like them because they don't use gimmicky mechanics. Although some of these fights were pretty disappointing and easy, while others are pretty challenging actually. Some boss mechanics can be really annoying and awkward for melee characters, but overall I like the boss fights. You really need to pay attention to your gear and upgrade your items whenever possible. Items are classified by different colors, which is nothing unusual for an ARPG. There are items which are exclusive to certain classes, and I like how you can find items for higher levels. It gives you something to look forward to, although these kinds of items are pretty rare. For a while, I didn't think the game even has two-handed swords, but I finally got one in Chapter 2. It even has a cool animation in the menu. You can find and use different gems that can be slotted in your gear, and like I said before, you should take the advantage of these features. My two-handed sword quickly became a frost weapon, which could freeze or even do heavy bursts of frost damage, which shatters the enemy. The game allows you to use 2 different weapon types and switch them with the press of a button. I used a bow and some spears when I could, but I mostly focused on melee attacks. The game also has mechanics like stagger and knockdown, although they seem pretty random. For example, the spider boss killed me more than a couple of times because of the knockdown effects. Champions of Norrath has a simple healing system like the majority of ARPGs. You're going to spend the majority of your gold on healing potions. This creates a simple gameplay loop of teleporting yourself back to the merchants in the current area and then go back and continue progressing. However, I really don't like how the teleportation system works in this game. They could have simply used the Diablo formula like pretty much all ARPGs. You just open a town portal, which allows you to go back exactly where you open it. But nope, the game has special portal shrines where you can teleport. The problem is they're not that common, which is the main issue, and you need to do a lot of backtracking sometimes. Speaking of which, it's also pretty easy to lose your progress and items if you die. Modern ARPGs allow you to respawn and keep your items while maybe taking a bit of your XP you gained. In Champions of Norrath, you lose XP and some items you looted after the last checkpoint. It's annoying, but not a huge issue whatsoever. The game has traditional RPG stats that you get to increase with each new level, but the weapons don't require any particular stats except the level of your character, and sometimes the character class, like I said before. The variety of skills you get to learn is a little bit disappointing. You only get a handful of unique active skills for each character class and a bunch of passive skills. I mean, it's not bad, it's pretty simple, but don't expect a crazy build variety. Like I said, I played with a Shadow Knight, but now I wish I started with the Warrior. In fact, I plan to play the game again with the Warrior on my next playthrough. The gameplay is really addictive, and I thought about the game a lot when I was not playing it. My Shadow Knight has some cool and unique spells, but you need to progress quite a bit in order to unlock them. One of the early abilities that you can unlock will make the enemy drop their life energy or mana upon death sometimes. Then you have to hold the block button to absorb it. It's pretty cool and useful, especially when you're out of potions. The quests are very simple, you only get 1 or 2 quests on each level. Sometimes you won't even have a quest until you do some more exploring and find where you need to go. The level design is not linear, but it's also not very complex. Although some maps are open for no particular reason and they lack the rewards for exploration. The dungeons in this game are procedurally generated every time you start playing. Even the number of floors in the dungeons is randomized, which is pretty cool actually. Overall, this is a very easy ARPG to recommend. If you can bother with emulation on the PC, you should definitely check it out. We can only hope to see a remaster for PC and current-gen consoles, it's a real hidden gem. And that will conclude the 10th episode of Hidden Gems or Trash. Did you play any of these games? Leave a comment down below.
Avil.
I'll have some affiliate GOG links for some of these games, so if you want to get them on GOG, be sure to use them. Speaking of supporting the channel, I have some brand new t-shirt designs, and check this out. Yeah, if your significant other annoys you while you're trying to game, you can just wear this. I think I took this meme a little bit too far.
Enough!
And of course, you can always become a Patreon or a YouTube member and get your name on the end credits of my videos. That will be all, and I'll see you in the next one.